Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, morning, and evening to you from all over the world. I'm so very glad that you are here to join us today for Eleanor's talk, A la Mémoire, the process. And all of you are very good friends. I mean, most of us, we know Eleanor very well. And myself, the first book I was introduced to for copperplate calligraphy was Eleanor's, of course. And Eleanor was my mentor during the Art of Letters mentorship program. So she has been such a rock in my life. I love her dearly. And I'm so very proud and privileged to be able to host her works. The Paris Auschwitz exhibition has been a dream of mine ever since I saw the works. So today, without further ado, I'm just going to hand the time over to Eleanor. I will spotlight her for you. So Eleanor, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dorothy. And once again, I am delighted to be here. I did want to thank one other person. Last week, when I did a little introduction to this program, I thanked Dorothy and Nicole, who really put everything together. But I want a special mention of my friend Lori Sayers, who's out there today. Lori, I meant to thank you last week. Lori has, she's been doing everything that I can't figure out on the computer, and has done several Zoom sessions with me to get this screen sharing right, which I think we did. She kept saying, all right, we'll try it again. And it's not that hard, I will confess. So Lori, thank you. And thank you all for coming back, many of you. And there are a few of you who were probably here for the first time today, or perhaps heard Gemma's talk yesterday, or Agnieszka's on Friday. So this program is rolling along really well, and it's back to me. So what my plan is for this fairly brief lecture, a little bit longer than last week's, but I'm not going to keep you all day, is to talk about the artwork really from, at least largely from the point of view of the artist, how these works came about in terms of, what kind of materials I use and how I made choices. Making art is a lot about choices. It's also a lot about experimenting. And it's also, as you will see soon, it's also a lot about making mistakes and recognizing them and trying to improve. So the exhibition that is online with the Art of Letters has 47 paintings in it, and my body of work in this series is probably 200 or something like that, of which many are not very good. I'm going to tell you that. I'm not going to show you a lot of the ones that aren't good, but there are a few that I want to show you because they were part of the process. And making something effective, which in this case means expressive, it means hopefully beautiful, it means, with a subject like this, it means powerful, if possible. Is for me somewhat of a trial and error procedure. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit of what I did and how I did it, and show you a little bit about how the project changed over the years, because as some of you know, I probably keep saying as some of you know, because many of you were here last Sunday when I did a little introduction. I've been working on this since 2010. Which is quite a long time, and not all day, every day for 13 years, but somewhat on and off. Some weeks, some months, I did a lot of work, and then there would be some periods where I didn't do any, but it kept going. And in fact, it's continuing. Now I'm working on a couple of unfinished pieces right now, at this very moment, which maybe will be in a show someday, or maybe not. They may end up in my reject file as well. So for a start, I'm going to switch to my screen share, and I'm going to repeat one or two things that I mentioned last week. So here's where we begin, and here's our full screen. So as many of you know, I'll say that one more time, I'll try not to repeat that. This project is about the thousands of Jewish children who were deported to the concentration camps from Paris to mostly to Auschwitz, where almost all of them were killed, where they were murdered. And in Paris, just briefly, since 1997, the city of Paris has acknowledged the loss of these many children, 6,700 Parisian children, with plaques. And the plaques have been installed, many in front of school buildings, some inside school buildings, and some in public parks. And all of them are in French, and the words very often start with "A la Mémoire," in memory. So quickly, this means in memory of the students of this school deported from 1942 to 1944 because they were Jewish, because they were born Jews. Innocent victims of the Nazi barbarity and the Vichy government. And this is, as I said last week, and as Dan Turbo spoke about this very movingly last week as well, this was the big admission of the French government that it was not entirely a Nazi. The Nazis were not 100% responsible. The French were as well. The French government, Vichy, the French police were responsible for the deportation of these children. And this one mentions that 1,200 children from the 11th district of Paris were exterminated in the death camps. Just to point out one thing on this second plaque, there are 380 plus plaques around Paris. Here are the significant words down at the bottom. Ne les oublions jamais. We must never forget them. And this is what my project is about. So I photographed plaques. Here's one from inside a school building that remembers the children from this particular school and lists the names of children who were sent to the camps. And as I said last week, I gained entree into some of the French schools so that I could see the second group of plaques, which have the children's names, not just the numbers, but the names and their ages. And in addition, I saw plaques in all over the city, in parks and gardens. This one is behind the Church of Saint-Germain in the 6th arrondissement and 6th district. And this remembers the very small children. It says here, tout petit, the young children who were too young to attend school. And here are their ages. So we looked at this last week. We looked at a different one from another district where there were hundreds of such children. So they are in gardens and parks. You can see it's outdoors with flowers around it. And this one was from the 9th district. So that's the really quick recap. But what I'm going to do is talk about the artwork. And what happened was back 13 years ago, maybe 14 years ago, I started copying down the words and I began to make some art. And I'll even rephrase that. I started to make some calligraphy pieces using the texts. And the first one, or one of the first ones, I have a lot of them that look kind of like this. I just wrote out the words. Here I'm using italic. I think I used black ink on a piece of white paper. I did this kind of the way I would have done a wedding invitation or something, a little bit formal, more or less centered on the page in italic calligraphy with a little bit of flourishing. And at a certain point, I looked at it and I said, well, this isn't it's not telling me anything. This says in memory of the children from the 10th or the 11th district, etc., who were sent to Auschwitz, but it didn't have any feeling. So I dripped a little water on it to see what happened if I blurred the letters a little bit. And then I tried another one, and this time I used a sponge, and this is a similar layout. Again, you can't see as much. A la Mémoire des enfants, in memory of the children, and again, the women and the men from the 11th. I know what it says because you probably only read a little bit of it. There's the 11th district. And I sponged water on this one. This was probably the same ink, the same paper. I took a sponge and I hit it with a sponge, not too delicately. I just wanted to mess it up a little bit, which I did. I messed it up. These are not pieces that I show. I'm starting with the ones that I don't show. And from there, it got worse. So, so this one, I believe, what I'm going to say, sometimes I think, or I believe in terms of the materials I used, because it's a long time ago and I didn't really keep a record. I was just making pieces of art or pieces of calligraphy. This, I believe, was I might have used a brown ink, and it was, I think this is a fountain pen ink, and so some of it turned a little bluish when it got wet. This time I wrote layers. I wrote the same words. You can see here it says A la Mémoire, and underneath A la Mémoire, and some other places you can see a repeated words, and it got less legible till it reached a point where you couldn't see it at all. So at this point, I had to take stock of what I was doing, and I won't say I dislike the way this piece looks, because it's kind of artistic, but it doesn't serve my purpose very well. And within a fairly short time, I actually had a purpose. In the beginning, I was just taking some words, these plaques, which certainly were very moving to me and very meaningful, but I thought, well, I'll make a piece of calligraphy. And at a certain point, and I'm going to say after I did this and before I did the next couple of pieces, I thought about what I was doing and whether or not I wanted people, or me, or anyone I showed the work to be able to read it. You can see the word exterminate at the bottom, but not much else. So this is not successful in terms of the goal. So what is the goal? The goal for me is to express the words. And here, this is something I showed last week. And I mentioned last week that this is the first piece, or one of the first pieces, where I felt like I was getting somewhere in terms of combining the style of writing, the color, and the background to express what the words say. I think I'm using Gothic letters, which many of you know very well was used in a lot of German manuscripts, also French manuscripts, but I think of it as a Germanic style, this kind of straight, narrow, stiff writing, which I actually love. I love this alphabet. It's called Textura. And I will say that this white writing was not done with white paint. It was done with something called masking fluid, which I'm sure some of you have done some experimenting with, but you write in this kind of gummy substance on your white paper. And when it dries, you paint over it. So I painted black over it. And then you erase, you use an eraser. And once everything is dry, and an eraser will pick up the masking fluid. So it will peel off these letters that I had written in this kind of gummy masking fluid. So it left a ghost of the writing. And then I did the red on top of it. And then I think you could probably see, let me zoom in a little bit here. Notice here and here, I outlined some of the letters, some of the words. So I outlined the dates, 1942 to 1944. These two words mean because. So They were deported in 1942 to 44 because, and here is ne juif, they were born Jews or Jewish, and victims, and then here the Nazi barbarity. So this was the first piece I really focused on in terms of trying to make something kind of demanding, make you look at it. And this was in 2010 also. And if you want any sizes, I can let you know. I know pretty much the dimensions of some of these pieces. This is not very big. This is about 9 inches by 12 inches. It looks like a big piece of calligraphy because it fills the space, but it's not really it's about A4 size, more or less, a little bit bigger. And then I tried using blue paper, and I wrote with red paint. This time I used gouache, red gouache. And in fact, you could see I wrote something under it. So I probably, here it is again, I wrote the text in white in little capitals underneath. And then when it dried, I wrote right on top of it in red paint. So we get a bit of a shadow of the writing underneath, and the letters not outlined, but just fairly clearly defined. This is more or less readable. Here's deported, here are the dates. Again, innocent victims, the Nazis, and here it says the government of Vichy, and here's the number, 1,200 children that were deported from the 11th arrondissement, the 11th district. Here it exterminated in the camps. This piece is unusual for me in that it has a lot of kind of empty background. Almost every piece that you'll see, not counting those first few that were the kind of invitation looking pieces, I tend to fill the space, whether it's a big sheet of paper or a small one. This one was a lot bigger than the other. It's 12 inches wide by 20 inches high, which is, for me, that's fairly big. For calligraphy, that's fairly big. And that would be about, I think about 24 by what? I'm not sure. I have some notes, but I didn't get this. 40, something like that. 20, 40, 24 by 50 centimeters. So it's a big piece of writing. The next group that I'm going to show you, oh, actually one more that is part of these early experiments. I tried doing what I did on the previous one, where if you notice, again, I used layers. I wrote a full text in one style of calligraphy and an entire new text, same text, but in a different style and a different color. And here, this, I would say, again, this is not completely successful. I would say, actually, I would give this a question mark. It's sort of up to you. In some of the work I do, I would say definitely this did not work, but this one is a bit too chaotic for me. Although there are some things with my flourishing that I think were very strong, but nevertheless, I'm not sure that this piece, which is pretty lightweight in terms of the lettering, it's all italic. I'm not sure this expresses the weight of the subject, and that is really up to the viewer. I found and continue to find that using a little bit heavier, less frivolous kind of calligraphy mostly serves me better. And here is another one. So I'm almost finished with the rejects. We're going to get to some of the good pieces pretty soon. This is only a reject because it's really, really hard to read. And I find that the overall effect isn't unsatisfactory, but it doesn't really hold up because it's a little bit kind of a little flat looking. But what I did on this piece, I can read a little bit of it. Here it says 165, and the next word is enfant, 165 here, Juif, Jewish children, and it's a plaque about one school and the children from that school who were deported to the concentration camps. And what I did on this piece, which I never did any other time, so this was an experiment that I found interesting but not successful. I turned it sideways. I think if you can read it from top to bottom, if you turn your head sideways, and you can see that I used very thin lettering. Here's an M and an O and an N going, well, it's going down on my screen, but of course it was going sideways when I turned the page. So I tried writing in two directions, and it became a little bit of an interesting geometric pattern. But again, this was not my favorite. So this is most of the ones that I'm saying I'm not sure about, I'm not entirely satisfied, obviously are not included in the exhibition, which is one of the reasons I thought you as an audience might be interested in seeing what I have, because there's so much that was development, so many pieces that I finished almost everything, but then I put some aside. I will show you a little bit later, I think 2 pieces that I finished, didn't like, and came back to years later, but we'll get to that soon. So then the next few are a variety of experiments that I did between 2011 and 2013. And I tried different media. I tried different calligraphy. This is one where I did the background in watercolor and then wrote on it with gold paint. Although again, you can see I wrote in black ink, and actually, I think I sponged that out. You can see it's all blurred. I used a wet sponge and I left the ghost of the writing. And then when it dried, I wrote again in this gold paint. And in this case, I did something that I've done frequently subsequently, which is I left out a lot of the little connecting words. So certain words that I considered important are the ones that you see. So again, in memory, a la mémoire, jeune fille, young girls, young Jewish girls. This was their ages between 13 and 18, arrested in 1944, the Nazi barbarity, deported, Auschwitz, exterminated. N'oublie pas, do not forget, do not forget. So this was another experimental piece. I'm not even sure if this is in our exhibition. It may not be, but
This is.
It is. Thank you. Okay. You know, I did want to mention, and maybe Dorothy, I don't think you mentioned, if you have questions as I go through this artwork, please feel free to put them in the chat, because some of what I'm going to be showing you, some of you may have a particular question about, you know, for example, which gold did you use? You know, what kind of paper did you write on? So any of those questions, normally we wait till the end and answer, you know, whatever questions are in the chat. But because I'm doing this kind of piece by piece with the artwork, I'm going to invite you to sort of interrupt me when I say sort of. If you put it in the chat, Dorothy will you know, bring it up when it seems, you know, the appropriate moment if you have a particular question. Now, you didn't ask, but this gold is gold paint. This is gouache. And later on, I did more experimenting with different kinds of gold. So this is not the shiniest gold there is, but it's it looks, you could, as I get closer, you see a little bit of light in it. And you can see also that I outline these letters. And the reason I outlined them was the gold was not strong enough. It disappeared a little bit. It didn't bleed. You can see right here. You can see this word. This word is victims. And had I also outlined that, it would have popped a little more. It would have come through.
Eleanor, we do have a question about this piece. Was there a particular reason behind the color choice?
That's great. That's a great question. I did, especially in the first years, the first couple of years that I did these pieces, I did a lot of work with black, red, and gold, just like that Gothic piece that I showed as the first one, or the first successful one, which I find are expressive of the story, a little bit of the history. Sometimes it's a very dark story, but it's also violent, and the red and the black bring that out, and the gold is also, to me, is a powerful tool for calligraphy. But in this case, you see blue as well, and I will say, I'm recalling a little bit, that when I did the first layer of writing, which you can see underneath is in black ink, that black ink, like one of those first the first attempts, where I was doing the kind of illegible calligraphy, when it gets wet, it turns bluish. And that's why this is wet black ink that turned blue. This was not a choice to have a blue background. I think my choice was more of a red background with some gold highlights. So that's how that happened. Okay, other questions, or do I go further?
No other questions.
Okay, just jump in anytime, Dorothy. Okay, so here I'm going to show you two pieces together, both of which were done around 2012. And let me show you this, and then the next one. And then I'm going to go back to the previous one. And they're both straightforward in a certain sense. They fill the space. They're quite legible, even though this one is in two layers, where I wrote first in black and then on top of it in gold. And again, I can see here my gold wasn't strong enough, so I outlined it. But you can read it. One can read it if you want to take the time. I'm not going to translate every piece, since some of you already heard me do that. I don't have to continue. But I think the words are clear. And my point showing you these two pieces together is that I feel that this piece is not as successful, and the next one is more so. Now, the lettering is different, and that's not the reason that I would say that. The reason is the color. Both pieces were done with red ink in the background and black ink, both of which were laid down on the piece before I wrote. This is black ink with which I diluted, so it became a wash, a black wash. And this red is also, I think I used a sponge as part of this to get a bit heavier and lighter color. And similarly with the other piece. So why do I say the second piece is more successful? And again, this is opinion, this is point of view, this is not necessarily what you might agree on. I think that this piece is a little too pink, and it looks a little bit sweet. And again, it's a message. It's a plaque that's remembering children who died in the concentration camps, and it's a little too, cute. It's a little pinkish. And the next one, using the same colors, I find much stronger. And it's stronger partly, I will say partly because of these big slashes of italic. This is a flourish on the D over here, or here I did a kind of a double flourish on that D. So these kind of cut through the simple Roman letters behind it. But also, I consider this looks like a thunderstorm to me. This looks like very bad weather. And the black is very menacing, which I will, fully confess, I didn't plan it to be menacing. I just tried out something where it was a little bit blacker on one side because I wanted to make it a little bit stronger. The previous one is a bit, it's got its black area here and its pink and white area. I think this was random. And the next one in terms of the background, and this one was a little more considered. And then when I wrote over it, I felt that the combination of the background and the lettering worked. Here's another one of this little series that I'm showing you. Oh, yes.
We have two questions from before.
Oh, okay.
Kun was asking, do you stretch the paper before you start each project?
I absolutely do. And that's a very good question. I'm working on, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go off the screen share and show you. Hang on. Let me wait. I'll come back to this piece and I'm going to go back to the camera. Wait, I'm going to show you something.
How is everybody doing? Everyone is good? Yeah.
Okay, here's a piece of wood. And you can see all this white around the edge is white tape. I use both sides of this, and I'll show you the other side in a moment. And what I do is I put a piece of paper that extends about, I don't know, 3 centimeters short of the edges. I wet the paper on both sides, and then I tape it all around with, it's called, I don't even know what it's called, artist tape. It's that white tape, but that's gummed. So you have to wet the tape. And here's a piece I've been working on, and I'm not showing you the whole piece, but you can see the tape around it, and the piece is very tight. And this has been, it was first white paper stretched on the board, and then I actually dry it with a hairdryer, because what happens is, put it down and I'll finish that sentence. What happens is when the paper is wet, it buckles. It stretches, it's instead of being, instead of being a flat, straight piece of paper, it has these little waves in it, which are not beautiful. And if I leave it, if I'm writing on the paper without stretching it, especially when I'm making a colored background, I'm painting onto it, the paper gets wet. And if the paper gets wet, the finished piece is going to curve, or it's going to go, wavy. So by stretching it before I begin, it's wet when I stretch it, I tape it, I dry it, it tightens. It's amazing to see what happens when you dry this paper, because when it's taped down and it's wet, it's very bumpy. It has air pockets and bubbles. You dry it and it's tight as a drum. So then I can write on it. I can even pour water on it, and it stays tight. So that I'm going to go back to my screen share. So that's the answer to that question.
Another quick question. When you remove the tape, does the paper fiber come up?
Good question. I cut the tape. Well, I'm going to go back. Sorry, I'm going to go back and show you where I cut it. Those of you who are calligraphers or work on paper. So let me grab a pencil. I'll use my finger here. Here is the end of the tape here, where my fingers are. So that's the end of the paper, and here's the end of the tape. So the tape overlaps the paper by about 1 centimeter. And when I cut it around the outside here, so that there's still a little strip of the tape left on the paper. It's left on the artwork. Is that clear? Are we getting that?
Thank
you. When I peel it, when I take it off, I cut it with a knife. I cut it right along here, and the paper comes off perfectly. If I mat the piece, I mat it down to the artwork area. So sometimes a little bit of the tape is left on the piece, but you can't see it once it's matted.
Thank you. There's another
You're welcome.
comment.
Yes.
In the two pieces you showed, the red looks like blood splatters, and the black looks like smoke. Was that part of the concept behind them?
Okay, I'm going to come back. So the black look like smoke, and say that again.
The red looks like blood splatters.
Well, in this piece, it wasn't intended, nor in that piece. Sometimes here's a truth about doing this kind of work. Sometimes I'll use a color like the red because it feels expressive. To me, it's important to use certain colors. I can't use pale green or baby blue in this kind of work. So, but I can use bright red. Sometimes I use red and yellow and orange. Just occasionally I use a strong blue. You'll see on some of the other pieces. There have been times where after it's finished, I'll look at it and I'll say, what I said here, I said, this looks like a thunderstorm. It's certainly, there's no denying that sometimes red splattered on the piece of artwork, which I have done occasionally, does look like blood. I mean, it doesn't look like, strawberry jam. If you're making an association, that would be, I think that would be logical. Okay, shall I continue?
Thank you. Yes, please.
Oh, you're welcome, and keep asking, because these are things that I'm hoping to share with you. Especially, I know that there are many of you out there who do calligraphy and who do other kinds of artwork. So this piece, I wanted to show you this because I did something. This was a one-off in terms of technique. These white little things on the background. And I'm sure some of you know what this is, but probably most of you don't. This was done with salt. I put the wet ink, or I think this was mostly black ink in these parts here. And I mixed it with a little bit of purple paint. And while it was wet, I tossed onto the paper some coarse salt, kind of like kosher salt, the thick grains of salt. And the salt creates these little starbursts. And sometimes it's really a bit random. I didn't cover the whole page with salt. I put it here and I put it around these. I hadn't written anything on it yet. I was just making a background. And I will recall that I tried it more than once, and this one worked really nicely. And sometimes it didn't really work very well at all. It might depend on how wet the paper is. It might depend on, I think it has to be kind of not soaking, but fairly wet. So not big puddles, but not dry, not too dry. Experimenting. This is all about experimenting. And I thought, oh, that's a nice background. So a couple of people mentioned that it looked like flowers. That wasn't my intention, but I just felt that it was a kind of an exciting way of offsetting the dark, kind of tumultuous background and the gold on the top. I just realized that I'm talking a lot and we don't have all that much time. I'm going to go a little faster. So this is one of my favorite pieces, and I'm going to tell you what happened here, which is this was an almost reject. I did a background. I did the writing in black behind the red. I did the red quite big. This, I think this was also quite a while back. I think 2013 that I did this piece, and it wasn't very big. This is an example of a piece that's, again, about an A4 size, about a 9x12, that looks really big because the writing is quite large. For you calligraphers, it's probably a 4mm nib that I did this with. But what happened, I finished the piece and I said, not so good. I didn't like it. And actually I said to my husband, who's quite a fine artist, a very good artist. I said, well, I'm going to throw this one away. And he said, stop, don't throw anything away. And he suggested that I try to wash the whole piece. And after it dries, try to write on it again. So I took my paper, which I think was stretched on a board, and I went to the kitchen sink and I poured water all over it and scrubbed it with a brush. And the red, which probably I can't really recall, must have been a waterproof ink, because otherwise it would have disappeared completely. It faded out. And I let the background faded out. The background was darker, the red was brighter, but it wasn't a good piece of art. So I let it dry, and then I looked at it and I thought, wow, that's it. I'm going to leave this. So I never did another layer on top, which is what his original suggestion was. Well, you could wash it out and use it as a background and then do more. And I said, this is it. I'm keeping it. So this was serendipity plus Leendert, my husband. Thank you, Leendert. And here is also kind of a one-off piece on this one. This is a very big piece. First of all, the biggest thing I've ever done with this project. This is done on 2 sheets of what is the size? I have a few notes. So 15 by 19 inches, something like that, 14 by 19, 2 large sheets of a kind of porous Indian paper, I think it was from India, that I had in a drawer and I had never used. And I thought, why not? And I took some very heavy black ink and tried writing on it, and it immediately bled, by which you can see what that means. The ink absorbed into the paper, but I kept going. I thought, why not? And I wrote a text, as you can see, in Gothic. I did it very quickly because if I kept my pen on the paper, this would happen, right? The longer my pen was in contact with the paper, the more ink was absorbed. And if I did it a little faster, like here, you could read part of it. So only a little of this is legible. So I know, maybe you can see it says A la Mémoire is our A la Mémoire. Here are the dates, 1942 to 1944. Here's the word Jews, Juif. Barbarity, the barbarity, Nazi. And this last line here, ne les oublions, never forget them, never forget them. You can also, if you look really closely, you can see the camps, the death camps, Camp de la Mort. But this piece I put away, I thought, well, I'm not going to do anything with this, but it's so fragile because the paper is so, if you pick up the paper, bits fall off, they break off like around the edges. But once I photographed it, I thought, well, this is really, it's unusual for me. And also I think it's effective. I think I managed to frame it for an exhibition some years ago when I had a big show of the work, but it was very tricky because the pages are so big and so fragile. Okay, I'm going to move on and show you 2 pieces that work together for a different reason. And this is one that was done for a particular school. The name of the school is down here, Lucien de Hirsch Primary and Secondary School. And this piece is actually heartbreaking. It's about, what it says is 1 month before the liberation of Paris, 1 month, 71 children, 11 teachers were arrested and deported by the German police and were killed in Auschwitz-Birkenau. And when I say did for the school, I mean, I copied the plaque from outside the school and I made this piece, which is quite large. And that was the reason I'm showing you this, apart from this very horrible story, is I did this in 2013, and I came back to the text 4 years later, and I did it again completely differently. It's the same text. You can see this word souviens-toi means you remember. Souviens-toi, you remember, or you must remember, right? It demands that you remember. And again, it's about the 71 children and the 11 teachers. And it's just interesting to me, number one, how one's take on the words can change so much, looking at it years later. This piece, apart from having this interesting kind of burnt looking background. Oh, here are your blood splatters. This was intentional to look like blood, the red. I used, oh, by the way, I did these with a toothbrush. That's how I do little dots. So these are little splatters. But other than that, it's very straightforward. It's Gothic, just like the earlier, or almost the first pieces. It's very legible. And then I moved into something a little bit, again, maybe a little more chaotic, and using, here I added in yellow, and I also did something for the first time, I believe, on this piece, or one of the pieces that I'm about to show you, which is I used oil pastels. And I wrote with oil pastels, which are kind of like soft crayons, but very luscious. They're very sticky and gooey, and they have wonderful, brilliant colors. And I colored over the writing in red and yellow, and I probably smeared it with my fingers to blend the color together. So red and yellow, and that's why some of it looks very orangey. And this is on top of black ink. And here again, I'm doing part of it in that Gothic that I keep going back to. You'll see even in the last few pieces in this series, I use Gothic a lot. And the other writing here, this big writing, this is Uncial, which is many centuries before Gothic was developed, but it's also a very powerful alphabet that I didn't use in very many pieces. I used this style, this Uncial here too, in the pink piece, the one that I said I rejected because it was too pink, but all that writing is in Uncial, but it was smaller. A small Uncial is a little more delicate. And I mentioned oil pastels. I'm going to show you fairly quickly, because I don't want to run out of time here, a few pieces where I used oil pastels as a major element in the design. So I did the writing first. This is hard to read, I fully admit, but I felt with this piece that writing with this black oil pastel, which I think I mixed with some white to get that gray tone, and some red and some yellow, and having the color move from left to right until it has this fiery look here on the right. I was very satisfied with this, with the results of this piece. And
Eleanor?
again, yes.
You have a
Question.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Julie.
The question by Ojas Munish was asking, how do you preserve the oil pastel artwork from sticking to other surfaces? Do you use any sealant or sealing spray?
Yes, I spray it. Yeah, I spray it with, I can tell you, I have it behind me in a cabinet. I'd have to take it out, but it's a fixative that's specially for oil pastel. If you go to an art shop and you ask for fixative for oil pastel, they will give it to you. It's a spray that is, you want to spray it outdoors because you don't want to inhale this, but it does fix it pretty well. And then I keep it, I let it dry for weeks. It takes a while for the oil pastel to dry.
Thank you.
Okay, and there are a few other oil pastel pieces. This is also one that it goes in the opposite direction, right? This one goes from dark to light, but the light is this fiery look, and the next one is light into darkness. And here, this looks like ashes. This wasn't, again, I didn't go into this saying oh, I'll make this look like ashes, but I wanted to go from light to dark and from red to black and see what happened with a little bit of light coming through in the middle. And here again, I didn't write a whole text. I just used significant words. The number of children deported from France by the Nazis, with the participation of the government of Vichy. That's the whole message right there. What I wanted to tell you about this piece is, this is what's interesting about this, is I did this piece in 2014 without the oil pastel. I did it in, I think I had some acrylic paint behind it, yellow and red and a little bit of magenta running into blue. And I finished the piece. And this is one of the ones with children's names that, in fact, these are the names, I think, from that school that I was in the interior lobby of the school. So I did this piece and it wasn't so interesting. And I came back 3 years later with my oil pastels and did a layer over it, which it makes the upper part recede a little bit over here, and it brings this forward more. So this is a piece that I'm not 100% convinced is my favorite. Well, I would say I am 100% convinced it's not my favorite, but it's not as strong, for example, as this. I feel like this one makes me catch my breath a little bit, and this is a little, maybe it's a little too pink and yellow and purple and little, again, a little sweet.
Eleanor, a question from
Yes.
Kun. As you use
Yeah.
many techniques in one piece, the paper seems to be quite a strong one. What paper is your favorite for these pieces?
Okay, I almost exclusively use a heavyweight watercolor paper, and with a slightly rough surface, not shiny smooth. And I can't give you brand names because I don't really know. I have some big packages of paper here with, 50, 70 by 100 or 50 by 70. Langard could probably tell us the size, but they're very large. And I think we bought, or he bought, packages of 500 sheets. So I'm not really sure if they're Arches or Fabriano or Canson, but they're all heavy so that they take a lot of abuse. I can do a lot of writing and rewriting and washing and scrubbing. Sometimes I scrub things out with a sponge, sometimes even with a brush, like a nail brush. And also I have sometimes corrected small mistakes, by scraping them with a knife or a razor blade. So yes, I use a forgiving paper. That one piece I showed early on with the blue background is just about the only piece of blue paper I've ever written on. And it was I was still in the very early stages of experimenting. And in later years, I created my own backgrounds rather than using a colored paper. And I'm going to get to those soon. I think I'm about up to that. I just want to show you this one or two more oil pastel pieces, and they are favorites. So this, I believe, is in our exhibition. So this has gold paint, and here I changed from the gold gouache to a fine tech gold, which is a little bit more, has more gold in the gold. It's less of a paint and has more mica in it. And the gold is very shiny. This is even in a scan. This piece was scanned. It was not specially lit and photographed. And I colored over the writing, and then I wrote over the color. So I went back and forth and back and forth. And I let certain parts recede by doing the red oil pastel on top. And then I sprinkled gold little speckles over it, which I think, did I mention that I do that with a toothbrush? I do that with a toothbrush. So I mix a little bit of fairly thick paint and I put it on a toothbrush and use my thumb to splatter it on the page. So this is one of the pieces I like very much. It's quite big. And I could give you the size. I think it's about 12 by 18 inches, 32 by 47 or 48 centimeters. And this is a very recent one. So those of you who recall the invitation to the exhibition, this is the second of that little series where I worked with yellow and red and orange and big Gothic letters with these sort of fracture capitals, which I became very fond of recently. And this piece, which is actually much more recent, this is from last year, I believe, 2022, I think, pretty sure. Yes, 2022 is one of the few, or let me say one of the first where I'm using copperplate. And I do want to mention that because you might have noticed, you calligraphers out there, that I don't use much copperplate in these, or I didn't in these pieces. And then it seemed too elegant, too feminine, perhaps, too happy. You know, it's like a party alphabet. You know, you're invited to a wedding, and yet at a certain point since about 2021, I started using it because I felt that the contrast with these heavy, somewhat decorative Gothic letters, these are a little more decorative, you might notice, than the early ones, is very striking. And then using these bright colors, I think, enhanced it. You can see where it's a little scribbly. I scribbled with my oil pastels here. So the background underneath was acrylic. I painted a yellow and orange background. I let it dry. I wrote on it, and then I went over it with the oil pastels. A lot of layers. And oops, let me just go back. Here we go. So this is like the one I showed you the other day, but a little bit different with all the children's names. And I mentioned earlier today that the project changed in terms of materials. So this is again one that uses oil pastels, but it also changed in terms of content. So it was around the time that I did this piece, which was, I believe, in 2016, that I started with the children's names and their ages. And that became a little bit more of an emotional connection for me. It was harder to do these pieces. Jacqueline, 10 months old, you know, Roger, 3 years old. So you saw the one that I showed before. This is a different one, a little bit different colors, a little different calligraphy, the same kind of layering of foreground and background, where the background has the history, the number of children deported, assassinated. Here it is, 131, too petite. These are the little children, the ones who were too young to go to school. And subsequently, I did other pieces. Again, here you can see it bigger, 87 of these little children. And here too, I'm using copperplate. You can see this. Gold, using probably the Finetec gold. So the text is in black and the names are in gold. I'm not sure this is also as good as some of the others because the gold tends to disappear a little bit. And I wanted those names to be more prominent. And as they are here. So this is another piece where, again, it's the too petite, the little children, their names and their ages. I'm using copperplate here, which I think is a good contrast with. This is a different style of Gothic. Some of you have done this. This is Gothicized italic, which is a bit more decorative than the Gothic from the Middle Ages. It's a little more contemporary, and I think it has a nice relationship with the copperplate. And here at the bottom, it says, "Passant lit leur nom." I read this the other day. It means, "You who pass by, read their names. Your memory is their only monument." This is the only way these children are remembered. And I would say, you know, not to give myself any special credit, but when this is printed or engraved or presented on one of those outdoor garden plaques, it's saying your memory is their only monument. And I'm saying by making this art, we are also remembering them. This helps us remember the children, their name. This has first name and last name and their ages. And here I just wanted to show you this. This is a background. And I as you could see on the previous piece, I was doing a lot with colored backgrounds, starting around 2017, 18. And this is one that I did with waterproof ink. So this is a silver waterproof ink and a blue waterproof ink on wet paper. So I sponged the paper and I used a brush and I spread the ink on the paper, and then I spread the blue, and I watched them bleed into each other. So this was a bit random, a bit, my only personal choice when I made this was to make the top lighter and the bottom darker. And when it dried, I just loved it. And I said to myself, I'm not going to write on this. I'm going to keep this as is. So I didn't keep it as an example. I just kept it because it looks like a wild storm at sea. And I did something similar here. So I did it again. This time my silver and blue have red between them. I'm not even sure that I like this background as much as that one. I love this one, but I wanted to do something with that silver and blue. And I did this piece, which is about the Velodrome d'Hiver, which is the bicycle stadium. I think Dan was talking about this last week. The bicycle stadium where thousands and thousands of people were held. They were held there for several days. And this one is also about a second place called the Gymnase Japy, which was also a stadium. No, it was actually a gymnasium, where both places where the men, women, and children were held for days. Many of them didn't even survive that. They had no food, no water, no sanitation. And then they were taken to Drancy, that some of you have heard of, and from there to Auschwitz. It says here on this one, and exterminated in the gas chambers. That's disappearing into my blue-black background. This is the same text. I just wanted to point out that I tried a completely different version. I did these one after another. I think I did this one a little bit before the other, but here I was also experimenting with gold paint, waterproof gold paint on a, no, let me rephrase that, waterproof gold ink as my background mixed with some bronze colored gold. And then I wrote on top of it, and it's the same one. It's about the Velodrome d'Hiver, the bicycle stadium, and the gymnasium, and being deported to Drancy, where they were held and sent to the death camps. So just how I sometimes take a text and finish it, and then I like the text. I feel the text is important, and I do something completely different with it. And here, this is actually, I got back to my early work of illegibility because I liked that gold and bronze and, brown background, and did a piece that is not completely illegible. And this one, I actually don't even remember what the full text was, but you can read in memory of the Jewish children who were deported 1942 to 44. And as you can see, I outlined these capital letters and these lowercase letters. I used a pointed pen with gold paint to outline the letters. Just a few more minutes. I know we're a little bit over time, but I'm going to just finish just about outlining. This is another piece where I did, I think I mentioned I used a blue background once or twice. Here I used a very strong bright red, bright blue. And after doing this writing, this is also about the velodrome. This was a major marker during the Holocaust of, taking, I think some of you probably read Sarah's Key. That's about the Velodrome d'Hiver. And after I finished it, I used a fine brush and I painted little by little. This was very labor intensive. I painted the important words. First I outlined them and I decided it wasn't enough. You see here on the D, there's a little outline, but then I decided to fill it in, and I filled in the words so that they really hit you. Incarcerated and transferred. You can read the words if you speak English, they're almost the same words. Incarcerated, transferred to the Velodrome d'Hiver, the bicycle, deported, camps of extermination, Nazi extermination camps, Jewish children. And this was from the 3rd district. One more with children's names that was quite experimental. I did this piece using yellow paint, which I very rarely use, and black for the subtext, so the names and their ages in yellow. And this white was done as an afterthought because I felt the piece was weak and I didn't know what to do with it. I'm going to give you credit again, Leindert. So my husband said, take a big brush and just do a big swirl of paint over it. So I said, oh no. And he said, just try it. You can't ruin it. So I did, and I ended up feeling very happy with this. This is the only one like it. I think if I planned to do that, it wouldn't come out the same. I want to show you 3 pieces. We're getting close to the end. I hope you're patient. 3 pieces that all have the same text. And actually, there are 4 pieces I'm going to show you that were done on black paper. And in each case, I used the writing, various kinds of gold, and my toothbrush for my speckles. And I also combined, I'm going to come in close so you can see this gold. I combined copper plate with my Gothic writing. Again, I'm using those fracture capitals, which I have grown to love. I'm very fond of those letters. And you can see that this is kind of a red gold. I think it's called Inca gold in the Fine Tech series. And I used a yellower gold for the copper plates. And also for the little speckles. So it's 2 different golds. Let's go back so that different parts of this come forward. And this is on this first one, and there are 3 pieces with the same text. It's the words, the text, arrested by the police, Vichy, etc., from the 5th district. 13, again, these are tout petit. These are 13 babies who never had time to go to school, were not old enough. And then I tried another one, and this time I added the names, and I tried using 2 different golds, and I have my writing on one side and the names on the other. And I'm not sure if this is as effective as for the message, for telling what I want to tell. You can see the big words are significant. The names tend to disappear a little bit. I think the one without the names is, it looks very complex, but it's much simpler than this one. And then I did one more. And here I tried a little bit more innovative kind of layout. In each case, I used 2 pens. I started with one word and then I continued with the copper plate. I didn't add it later. And so that I built it up line by line. And always, I will say always experimentally, so that I didn't have a pencil layout. This is what I tell my students. You must start with a pencil layout, but I did not. I just let it happen as it happened. And as I said at the very beginning of this talk, not everything worked. And sometimes I came back and added to it and made it work. And sometimes I left it in one of many drawers or portfolios of rejects that I have here. And finally, I have one final piece, which is, this was the first piece I did on black paper. And this actually goes back a few years. In fact, this is probably the first one where I used copper plate. And this is 2016. Those of you who have the book that contains many of these pieces, it's called Paris, Auschwitz. This is the book cover. And when I selected a piece for the cover, I felt that this one, and it's only, I think the whole piece is not on the cover, just part of it, this has the impact that I was looking for. I think on this piece where I have the writing, this is in red gouache, and then gold for the subtext, the smaller words. And then I used a sponge, which I dipped into the gold paint and sponged out parts of it without completely obliterating it. And that is, I would say that is all I'm going to say at the moment. Since it's almost a quarter after, I'm going to go back to my own image here. And I will ask you if you have any questions or comments, anything you'd like to say. We have a quiet.
Eleanor.
Yes. Yeah.
Can you give me some hints on using the masking fluid with the broad nib? I found when I tried, I just got lumps. And is there a product that is easy to use?
Well, that's a good question. And I can give you a little bit of an answer, but not a definitive one. For one thing, I haven't used it in a while, so I have nothing, current to tell you. If you go to an art shop, get the best one you can get. There might be a cheap one and it's not very expensive, but get the good one. You have to shake it before you use it. Otherwise it gets lumpy, and you probably have to keep shaking it or stirring it because it settles. And the other thing is, and this is something that I learned somewhere along the line from one of my teachers, if you put just a little bit of color in it, just very, very faint, you'll be able to see what you're doing. Because otherwise it's a little bit hit and miss, and I'm sure, this is now 13 years ago, but I'm sure I must have done that on that first Gothic piece because the letters are very precise, the white ones, which were done with the masking fluid. So the other thing is, if you have a shop and or maybe an online source and they have 2 or 3 different brands, but buy them all and see which one works. Because sometimes it doesn't, that's the thing. Some materials are great, these golds that I've been using, the Finetech gold, even the gold gouache, the Winsor Newton gouache, the Schminke gouache, they'll last forever, but the masking fluid won't. So you have to.
Yes, I found it was actually reacting like rubber cement. I was getting.
It was probably too thick. It might have been. Sometimes, they don't sell a lot of it, so it might have been in the store too long.
Yep. Probably in my cupboard too long too.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Others?
We have a question about how do you decide what type of calligraphy to use, and do you plan the layout? Do you have it in your mind when you start, or you just go for it and see what happens?
Okay,
and,
so that's
a related one about planning. How do you decide on the sizes, on the size of each project? I mean, of each piece. Yeah.
Okay, so let me think. What was the first question? How do I choose the calligraphy?
Yes.
Sometimes I've mentioned a few times today, there's a little bit of trial and error here, and some that don't work and some that do work. And so sometimes when I read the text, I kind of have an image of what kind of lettering I want to use. I will say, and I know a lot of you have had a class with me and have heard me say this before, I'm quite traditional in my letter forms. So I don't do experimental lettering very much. Wildly experimenting for me is maybe not using lines. So I let my letters move a little bit, but I don't invent letters, and I don't do modern calligraphy, what we call modern calligraphy. So I have a repertory of styles that I go back to, which are several different styles of Gothic, italic, but italic can be a heavy italic, it could be a light italic, it could be a flourished italic, it could be a somber italic. I use some uncial. I have to say I haven't used Carolingian in any of these. I find that I like to combine styles for contrast. So contrast is one of the important concepts in design, you know, getting something dark, something light, something big, something small, a heavy style of calligraphy, a lighter weight. I find that I said this, I find that the that Gothic calligraphy with the copperplate was surprisingly nice. I was really anti-copperplate for at least 5 or 6 years for this project. It just was too pretty, but now I've been using it, but mostly with contrast. You know, I'm not writing the whole text in copperplate. That I don't think that would work for me. So that's how I choose. There may be something I've been doing lately. When I showed you those 3 pieces in a row on black paper, I did those one after another. And I used essentially the same combination of Gothic and copperplate, but with different relationships, different colors. So I might do a piece and then say, oh, I'm going to do that again. And I'll make my writing a little brighter, a little bigger, a little smaller, more space, whatever. So things very often, I wouldn't say they blend from one to another, but finishing a piece very often gives me an idea for what I'm going to do next. And often it's, I'm going to do this again. You know, I like it. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to change something. So for the size, this is a little bit ridiculous, but I have a couple of boards that I stretch my paper on. One is very big and one is not so big. And those are the sizes. So sometimes I almost always use the full space. I also have a certain amount of space here that I could work with. So this is my small board. This is the small one. And the big one is about twice that size. So if you look at the sizes on the exhibit, you'll see that the pieces tend to be around 9 by 12 inches or double that size, or 12 by 20, 12 by 20, 12 by 18 or something. So either that size or twice that size. And so I have hardly done any that are very long and narrow or squares. I tend to go with my board. So was there a third question? Did I answer 3 questions?
Yes, you did. And Margaret says she would like to comment. Go ahead, Margaret.
Margaret?
I'm not a calligrapher.
No.
So I want to
This is my
comment on the,
sister. Could I say you're my sister? That's my sister. Okay.
and consultant on how to spell French. What struck me this time was that there are different ways in which they call for memory. Some of it is ne les oublions pas. Let us not ever forget them. But then all the others are direct address, and it's not plural, and it's not formal. It's you. Souviens-toi, remember. N'oublie pas, don't forget. And I'm not sure what to do with that, but it seems to me that in the way that the plaques were put together, you've got 2 styles there, and the direct one is amazingly direct. If for those of you who know French, it really is pointing a finger and saying, you, don't forget.
I think if I can just respond quickly, I
Yeah.
think that the purpose of the plaque is not for a group of people to stand there and read it. It's you. You're walking by, you're looking at it, and you should remember. So I think it speaks to me when I see these plaques, even now, you know, being here so many years, it's not, hey, all you out there, look at what happened. It's you, stop and read this.
Yeah.
The other thing well, this leads to the other thing, which is something you haven't said, but you've said in the past, which is how irritated you got at people passing by and not reading.
Yeah, I wouldn't say irritated. I'm just sorry,
Noticing.
I notice that sometimes you'll be on a busy street and there'll be one of these plaques, or in a park, some of those are very big, the ones in the parks where they have a lot of names and nobody's looking at it. But maybe some people do.
Well, this was fascinating, even for a non-calligrapher.
Thank you.
Thank
It was.
Thank
It
you.
was. Oh, I'm just looking at the comments. There are a lot of very positive comments, and there are so many, Eleanor. So I will email these to you so you can look at them slowly. Yeah. Does anybody
you.
else wish to comment? I see Kitty is leaning towards the microphone. Is there something that you wish to say? Hey, Marina is here. Marina, would you like to say something? You need to unmute.
Yeah, just I want to apologize for not being in the first in the opening of the event. I was working and I missed it, and I congratulate you with all the work you've done. It's gorgeous. Some pieces are wow,
Yeah.
so heartbreaking. It's not a nice theme, of course, but it's very moving. It's very touching. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Marina is one of the bright stars in the calligraphy
Oh, yeah.
world. So I appreciate that very much.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marina. She is a bright star. Yeah, a lot of comments saying it's very insightful, very powerful, very moving. Yeah, even the failed pieces, the rejects, they're also very, very special.
Thank you.
Okay.
I thought you would enjoy, you out there would enjoy seeing some work that isn't very good. When I've had a class and I say, you should look at this because it didn't work, everyone's very happy. They say, oh yeah, you can do bad work too. So, but I do keep these, and sometimes I do go back and I rework them, and I can make something work, years later. And other times, no.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to tell everyone that Eleanor's book is available. In this book, I think, Eleanor, you've got about 70 pieces of the work?
40.
40 in the book? Okay, so you can bring Eleanor home with you, bring her works home with you. There is an order form which I have just put into the chat. And you can just put in your orders. Eleanor will be in touch with you about shipping the books to you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording now. Okay.